So welcome all to this demonstration of GovStack Consent BB Work Package 3 demonstration. So I'm joined together with by a bunch of guys from iGrant team. So I'm not going to go through everybody, but the people who will be demonstrating primarily is Kashish and George. So next slide, please, Kashish. So today, we'll give you a little bit of a background about what we've been doing with Work Package 3, what were the deliverables and the software components. Then we will have 3 sections of demonstrations. Demonstration 1 will focus on an application that has embedded the Consent BB, and we will be showcasing the administrative functions. For example, if an organization application want to consume or process any kind of data, how would the administrator go about configuring Consent BB, the concept of data agreements, and so on. In the second demonstration, we will showcase a reference validation use case scenario around data sharing. And here's where 2 organizations would be using the consent building block as a component that enables a consented data sharing. And in the demonstration 3 is where we will focus on the individuals, how the individuals is able to opt in, opt out of Consent BB, why the privacy dashboards, and how the organizational webhooks get triggered. that can be integrated to, for example, to any third-party application processing. Finally, we'll conclude, and if there's any, I'm hoping that we still have some time to look at any other business. But feel free to interrupt us at any given point of time and ask any questions that you may have. Kashish, next slide, please. So when it comes to the Work Package 3 development, deliverables, and software components, we had 4 deliverables as part of the procurement contract that we've had. The developer documentation, the test protocol specification, the test results, and the validation protocol. All these things are also available for you to look at, and it's all released now. We have also created a project wiki and a release page where you can have a full view of all the components that are part of the consent building block. And last but not the least, we also have the API specification in Swagger format. On the right side is like a snapshot of the release page. So every release, we have this kind of a list of things that we release. So essentially, you can see 7 different components that we release in every release that we have. So in our Work Package 3 first release, we had the Open API spec. And on the right side, you can see the release numbers of each of those components. So the Open API spec is where we have all the Swagger specification. Kashish, if you may shift quite quickly to the browser. The browser, please. Yeah. The Open API spec, if you could, yeah. So this is where all our APIs are documented. Every single thing is following Open API, Swagger format. And you can also execute commands directly from this page, and we have hosted it in our own demo environment today. And hopefully in future we have it in GovStack sandbox. The next tab, please, Kashish. So this is the wiki page that I was talking about, essentially providing all kinds of documentation that are needed for any development organization or developer to get a hang of what Consent BB is about. And then the last tab is a specific release page, if you may, if you can go to, yeah. As this is what I was mentioning. So 15th November, we released the 2023 11.11.2 release. And in every release, we also package a demo application or a reference application, which is a diabetic app that showcases the key functionalities of Consent BB and data sharing. Back to the slide, please, Kashish. Next page, yeah. You can go to the next slide. To give you a little bit of a hang of the data for diabetic application, so what we have done is integrated the consent BB building block. So the bottom box that you see and all the colorful components is what we have been building for the last few months, which has also been specified in the software specification, etc. And the top part is the client SDKs. So on the left side, you have the mobile privacy dashboard SDKs where end users would consent, opt in, opt out to any data agreements. And we also have the portal version, which can be deployed, for example, in a web page. Next click. Yeah. So what we are going to demonstrate today is essentially various use cases that is being laid out in the GovStack consent specification. So this picture is being very much borrowed from the GovStack consent spec. We just replaced the organization with data for diabetic application. So the first demo will focus on the top part where an administrator is able to perform CRUD operation, create, read, update, delete data agreements, and is also able to do administrative actions on the consent building block or consent microservice. So with that statement, I'll hand it over to George and Kashish to demonstrate.
Thank you, Lal. Kashish, if we can
go
to
start with the. Yeah.
So at the moment on your screen, you're seeing the administrative dashboard that we have developed for the consent building block. This administrative dashboard belongs to the Data for Diabetes organization. From the Getting Started page, the organization admin of Data for Diabetes organization can manage the organizational info, configure cover image, logo image, overview, sector, policy URLs, etc. In the next page, if we can go to the data agreements page. Here, the organization admin can define different data agreements that is belonging to, that is going to be used in the application that they are going to develop. In this case, it is going to be data for diabetes reference application. There are 3 agreements that is defined by the organization admin here: backup and restore data agreement, which is having lawful basis of processing as consent. So Kashish, if you can click on the eye icon of the data agreement. So here we can see the details of that data agreement. The first field is usage purpose, which is giving the name of the agreement. It is going to be used for backup and restore purposes. And we can provide description for an agreement. At the same time, this agreement is versioned as well. So whenever a change is made by the administrator to the agreement, it will be auto-incrementing the version. It is following semantic versioning system. There is a field called as data exchange mode here. It is none at the moment. There are 3 types of data exchange modes: none, data source, and data using service. Data source is when a company is releasing the data from the organization to an external external party or towards an individual. Data using service is when the company wants to consume the data from other companies or from individuals. And the other field here is lawful basis of processing. This is as per GDPR Article 6. There are multiple lawful basis of processing here: consent, contract, legitimate interest, vital interest, public task, etc. So as an organization admin, I can choose the lawful basis of processing, which is mattering to my purpose of creation of this agreement. And then apart from that, there is data policy configurations. Under policy configuration, there are policy URL, jurisdiction, industry scope, storage location, data retention period, how much period the data is being held in the company, geographic restriction, and third-party data sharing. Third-party data sharing is a key detail here because whenever the company wants to release the data towards an external system, it has to be marked as true and communicated to the individual that the data is getting released from their system to an external system. And then there is DPIA configurations, which if present, the organization admin can input that here. And then there is data attributes. Data attributes signifies which all data is getting consumed by the company or exposed by the company. In this case, it is the app data that is getting backed up and restored in the application. So let's close this data agreement, Kashish. The second data agreement that is defined by the organization admin of Data for Diabetes organization is registration data. if you can click icon for that data agreement, Kashish. Yeah. So here, as discussed earlier, the usage purpose is defined. And now we've noticed the data exchange mode is data using service, because the organization Data for Diabetes is collecting some data from the individuals for the purpose of registration towards the app. The lawful basis of processing in this case is contractual lawful basis of processing. And the third-party data sharing in the data policy configuration is false, because this is not going to be shared to any other third-party organizations. And the data attributes that is getting collected by the Data for Diabetes organization for registration purposes is name and mobile number of the individual. Let's close this data agreement, Kashish. And the third data agreement is donate your data. Let's click on the eye icon. Here we can see that organization admin has created a data agreement for third-party sharing purposes. So in this case, the Data for Diabetes organization admin has decided that we can give a functionality for the individuals to donate their data towards an external party. In this case, it is the research initiatives for research purposes. But the lawful basis of processing here, it is consent, and data exchange mode is data source, because the data is getting shared from the company towards an external system. In the data policy configurations, we have marked the third-party data sharing as true, because the data is getting released from Data for Diabetes organization towards a third party for research purposes. The data that is getting released from the organization is age, CGM data, insights, and scanned images. Some of these are diabetic-related data that is collected by the organization. We can close this data agreement, Kashish.
Yeah. If I may quickly add, so just to give you a little bit of a feel to all the viewers who are listening. So these agreements are the way by which GovStack proposes, where any organization admin can define data agreements based on certain lawful basis of processing. So in this case, for example, we have two data agreements that are defined that uses consent as the lawful basis. One for donating your data, and the second for backup and restore. And when it comes to registration data, it is a contractual purpose, where you can still view the data agreement from an individual point of view, but you cannot opt out of doing it.
Okay. So one more thing I would like to add here is that all of these data agreements follow ISO 27560 standard that is defined by ISO. Just as a note.
Yes,
so
Satya has a question.
Is good.
Yeah, thanks, Lala. That explanation helped put things in perspective. I was just trying to, while the explanation was going on, related to what kind of usage purposes would we define for the USCT use case? Obviously, it won't be donate the data or something like that. So what is the kind of usage purpose? And is there something like, is there a standard set of usage purposes that the administrator can choose, or that has to be like custom defined? Thanks.
Yeah. So typically, I mean, if we take a step back from an organization point of view, any data that an organization processes, at least post GDPR, the organizations are to perform what we call as a DPIA, Data Protection Impact Assessment, where they evaluate the various processing activities for personal data. So in the case of UCSD, I would assume that one clear usage purpose is payment processing. Did I answer your first question?
Yeah, sure. So that's good. Payment processing. Okay. What about getting the user's data from the ID system and using it for, essentially determining their eligibility vis-a-vis a social registry system, right?
Yeah. Essentially, the right way to do it is, we need to figure out what are the various types of processing that the organization has. We typically perform what we call as a mini DPIA in this context, and define these agreements based on that outcome that is coming in from that mini DPIA. Philip.
No, actually, the question on your answer was exactly what I wanted to say. And that every organization in this specific case will come with certain requirements which the user might not be aware. When you go into this USCT, the user might not know that to get the benefit, you need the organization share the data with someone else. So this is the type of information that can sit in this type of agreement. But I mean, you both answered, you answered it already.
Right. So Satya, for example, in the case of data for diabetic, the organization that owns the data for diabetic figured out that, okay, we need data for registering, we need data for providing some kind of a backup and restore functionality, and we also sell the data to third party or donate the data to third party, whatever way we want to call it. In this case, they say that it's to donate your data probably for research purposes and so on, and in which case they're seeking consent for doing that.
Great. So it looks like there is a different DPI work, which, some kind of consultant or somebody has to do. And then based on that, the outputs of that would result in the kind of usage purposes that will be needed.
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. So just to elaborate a little bit more. So there are like privacy companies that actually perform these DPAA post GDPR. So for example, we have already integrated our solution to a company in Finland called Privacy Ant that perform this kind of a consultancy work for performing DPA in a commercial context. And the outcome of the DPA is typically a DPA report. But what we did is also converted that DPA report into a machine-readable data agreement that can be uploaded onto our portal straight away.
Thank you, Lal. So I'll continue. So as mentioned earlier, the data agreements follow ISO 27560 standard. It's a consent record information structure standard defined by ISO. Okay, so now moving on to the next page, Kashish, we can quickly go through all the function that is available in the admin dashboard. So the next page is personal data, which shows all the personal data that is exposed or consumed by the organization. So the organization admin can decide, understand how much impact is there for the organization in terms of exposure of data or consumption of data. It can be filtered according to the data exchange mode, data source, data using service, etc. The next page is manage users. Inside manage users, we have configuration. Here we can configure the system to onboard the users from an external identity provider. So if you can click on the plus button quickly, Kashish. We support OpenID Connect protocol. We can configure an external IDP here so that that user can onboard without creating a new user in the consent BB system, but using existing credentials in their organization. We can close this for now, Kashish. Other way to onboard users is to upload a CSV file using the upload button. The next page is consent records. This page gives an overview to the organization admin to see which all consent records are present in the system. If you notice, none of the personal information is being shared here. All of them are anonymized behind IDs. But we can clearly see which individual has performed opt-in or opt-out against a certain data agreement and what was the version of the data agreement they allowed to. On clicking the eye icon here, we can see which data agreement and what was the detail inside that particular data agreement at that point of time.
So if I may quickly add one. Yeah. So typically this is used for audit purposes. So let's say somebody actually complained about the whole thing, and in which case they have some kind of a record. They have it in their device that they share it with the organization and say that, okay, hey, I actually opted out of marketing and communication, but I'm still getting calls, spam emails, and so on. Could you check what the situation is? So this is a page where they can say audit a particular user's request straight away, and it's purely given for that purpose. Satya.
Right. So this individual ID that we're looking at, this is the tokenized ID that has come from.
That's correct.
The ID building block, right?
No. So this is an internal. This ID is purely internal to consent building block. Nobody else knows it until there's a connection that is made. So the application would know it, nobody else. So for example, in this case, data for diabetic application would have a mapping to its users to this individual ID. And that's how they consume the service from ConsentDB.
So at what point, where is the dashboard which shows me the consent record for the tokenized ID of the individual itself? The actual
tokenized ID of the individual,
foundational ID which
so
resides in MOSIP.
So typically the way it works is that the tokenized ID or the foundational ID is with the application. So the application has some kind of connection to this individual ID. So when you uploaded your individuals in or connect to the OpenID Connect, that is where the connection is happening. And the application users who actually has some kind of a token is able to access that particular individual ID that is created in the consent building block.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay. So now if you go to the next page, which is the privacy dashboard, from here, the organization admin can see which version of privacy dashboard has been deployed towards the individuals. Privacy dashboard is an optic component which is used by the individuals to perform their privacy rights, to opt in and opt out of a data agreement. This is the web version of that privacy dashboard. Now, moving on to the next page.
So typically, like for example, if a company has a web portal and let's say Amazon.com, and I log into Amazon.com, so this link that you see can be embedded within the privacy dashboard link within Amazon or within a hospital or within a governmental organization's web page, for example. The exact same function is also available as a mobile SDK that is available as an SDK that can be integrated into Android and iOS with a few lines of code, basically.
Yes. So moving on to the next page, which is the account management pages. The first page is Manage Admin. From here, the organization admin can manage their user credentials and profile. In the next page, Kashish, the developer APIs. The organization admin can create API keys and other developer credentials and distribute it towards the developers to integrate the ConsentDB into their application. The next page is View Logs. In the View Logs page, the organization admin can see which all. Yes, Satya, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting them. So in the GovStack framework, we don't use API keys, right? So we have the, essentially this needs to be a member of Xroad. So I'm just trying to understand, reconcile this API key concept now here. Where is this fitting in?
So this is like an extra additional thing that we have brought in from a solution point of view. This doesn't necessarily have to be used in GovStack if it is not required.
Okay.
So this is like
it doesn't mean that the application needs an API key, right, in order to use your building block. Then that's a problem.
The client application might still need it, Satya. So Xroad may not need it because it's a backend component. But if you are talking about a individual client application provided by like a data for diabetic app, for example, would need an API key to connect, for example, Satya to the ConsentDB services, basically. So this is like a microservice concept that we have onboarded.
The other option would be to use access token of the individual in the ID provider from the ID provider, as long as the ID provider is configured here.
Yeah.
Yes,
Honey.
Yeah. I'm just thinking now, assume that I am the, let's say, Ministry of Health, and I have 10 different services, and each service needs to have its own consent. So the assumption is that they can use the same building block, but they can configure service by service all those kind of things that you have just mentioned, and then each service will have to store the how can I say, the token of the users or individuals who are using this particular service.
Yeah. George, you can step in. So the way I would say in that case is that if you go to the developer API, for each of the services, you can have a separate API token created as a way to control the access to the specific APIs, basically.
No, but my question is that each service will have its own kind of users who are giving consent for this particular service. So with the same building block, with the same instance, you can manage multiple services, and each service has its own users, has its own contracts, etc. Right?
When you say service, do you mean to?
For example,
is that like
if I may jump in here, I think service would be you can use service analogous with data agreements. So you can define a specific data agreement for different services and integrate the APIs from the consent building block, and then it will work automatically as long as you have the access towards that APIs.
Okay, so if you have like a diabetes app and another whatever hypertension and whatever, so you have different applications, and each one has a slightly different consent that is given for this particular application or service.
Got it.
Yeah, as long as it's different end user application.
Yes.
And if you want to granularly, I mean, each end user application has its own, for example, usage of data. You probably want to have a different instance for each of those applications. But if you have a situation where, let's say, it's a hospital management system app, then you might define it like how George has said. You might. So it depends on the context in which how you want to deploy this.
So the question is, you need to have an instance per service, kind of, if those contracts are different.
If the contracts are different, and if they are, I would say, if they are different legal entities, I would
say it is based on the organization structure of that particular organization. How would they want to go about that? But apart from that, you can now always define multiple data agreements for different services and manage the consents accordingly.
Like we have a situation where there was an application that was managing a bunch of different diseases in the healthcare side. In that case, it makes sense to have one consent instance and manage it as different data agreements for different usage and so on. But if you have a situation where these applications, end user applications, are provided by different end user apps, then you probably don't want to confuse the user with, you want to be very specific to that particular app functionality. In which case, you want to have a different instance of the consent BB.
Okay, thank you.
Freddie.
And I think you discussed it already, but it's the other example, the other way around, is that I want to give a holistic consent to all the healthcare that I'm given by 10 different organizations, or I want to give a consent to my backache, but not my venereal diseases. So it's a granular consent depending on, you can use the attributes of the disease catalog.
Yeah, that's correct. So at the end of the day, it's an organizational. It's an organization that actually decides how they want to deploy it. If they have an app that actually is providing multiple functionality from an end user point of view, you probably want to have a single instance of consent BB and define multiple data agreements. But if you have multiple apps, you probably want to be very narrow, and in which case you deploy multiple instances. Back to you, George.
Thank you. So now in this page, in the view logs page, the organization admin can see different logs that has been recorded for the consent building block. So there are different categories for logs. Can you click on filter categories, Kashish? Security category, API calls, and Webbooks. So an organization admin can audit the consent building block system, which all actions have been performed in the system. Moving on to the Webbooks page. Here, the organization admin can configure a webbook and inform an external service when certain actions are performed in the consent building block. If you can click on the plus button quickly, Kashish. Here we can see there are different events we can choose for the webbook to be informed. There are two events, consent allowed and consent disallowed. So whenever an individual opts in or opts out of a particular data agreement, an external system can be notified and trigger an IT workflow based on that.
Yeah.
We can close this.
Let me clarify. Let me give an example here. So let's say in this case of a diabetic app. So let's say the social institution that is running the service want to monitor the number of people that are diabetic between the age of 40 and 50 in a particular region in Stockholm, for example. So you can put that trigger to collect this information, tie that trigger into a specific data agreement, and then keep updating depending on the webhook event that you receive, essentially. So this can be used for multiple in multiple different ways, but this is like a standard way of, say, triggering actions based on the end user actions that happens in a typical microservice-based system. Satya.
Yeah, great. So the IAM building block, in fact, has implemented the PubSub functionality. I hope
this
you're
is
aware
PubSub.
of that. This is PubSub, right? So essentially, does the consent building block then create a room for changes in a data agreement if the user has revoked their consent, and can applications subscribe to it? And can you explain how that PubSub will work in this model?
Yeah. So at this moment of time, we have kept this PubSub only from an end user action point of view. Nothing stops us from really adding more into this webhook event. So if you click that plus button again, Kashish, so you can see that, for example, all events, and you can only see 2 events at this moment of time. That is all about individual actions, basically. So you can we can it's like a it has a modular architecture where you can pretty much capture anything that you want, and we can pretty much add new trigger events that can be captured by an external application using webhooks, basically. So as long as the other service is able to say provide the endpoint here, that endpoint can actually be capturing any kind of trigger that happens.
No, so I just wanted to understand that you will be able to use the PubSub functionality in the IAM in this case, right? And event will be over there. You can subscribe to the events in the IAM PubSub.
Yeah, we can subscribe to any. We can publish any endpoint here, and that endpoint can receive notification for any trigger events that happens related to consents, basically.
Okay. Thank you.
David?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one question related to the consent records. I would like to know if the data structure of the consent records has been thought so to prevent any statistical inference, like using k-anonymity models and so on. Because if you have, for instance, in your diabetes application, rare forms of the disease, then if you have less than 10 individuals consenting to a given data contract for a given provider, you may end up with groups of less than 10 people concerned, and therefore may allow re-identification.
Yeah, so at least at this moment of time, the way we have adopted is pretty much follow the ISO 27560 recommendation. Our recommendation to any application is essentially to perform a DPIA and assess these kind of risks early on. If there's any kind of special situation that is arising, and address it. As a platform, we are providing a mechanism to configure the agreement the way organization seems fit, and the organization, the way you assess the risk is basically via the DPIA process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So
to summarize, before we jump back to the slides, if you can go to the data agreements page, Kashish. So now the Data for Diabetes organization has defined 3 data agreements: backup and restore, registration data, and donative data. So now we'll jump back to the slides. Over to you, Lal.
Yeah. So if you go ahead, Kashish, demo 2. So in demo 2, what we are going to do is really, we brought in a validation use case scenario where 2 organizations are involved. So on the left side, there's an organization called Skatteverket, which is a Swedish tax agency, which also holds, by the way, the, let's say, personal data or citizen data or resident data, whichever way you will want to look at it. And then on the right side, we have our data for diabetic application. So what we have done is really embedded the consent building block in as a service in the Skatteverket. And of course, the consent BV is there already today in the data for diabetes. The use case that we have formulated is a situation where the data for diabetic application can allow any users within Skatteverket to be registered registered as a user into data for diabetes. So just like how you have like sign up with Google, sign up with Facebook kind of thing, you can have a similar kind of function, sign up with your say citizen personal data kind of thing, or a foundational ID kind of thing. So that kind of functionality can be implemented in a very easy way via the concept of data agreement. Back to you, George. You can demonstrate.
So Kashish, we can go to the admin dashboard of Skatteverket for a second. So now we are introducing one more organization into the demo use case, which is Skatteverket organization. Skatteverket is Swedish tax agency. This is used as an example organization for the use case here. The Data for Diabetes, as Lal mentioned earlier, Data for Diabetes organization is building an app, reference application called as the Data for Diabetes app. This app will allow the users to register themselves into the application. So when registering, the individuals can bring their data from Skatteverket, Swedish tax agency, and onboard to the app. That is the demonstration we'll be doing with the app. So before doing that demonstration, the Skatteverket organization, which is the data source here, because they are going to expose the data from their database towards data for diabetes organization, they need to define a data agreement. If we can go to the data agreement, for allowing the release of data from their system towards data for diabetes. So in this case, the organization admin has defined, because prior to this, they have done a data disclosure agreement between data for diabetes and Skatteverket. Now Skatteverket organization admin is going to define a data agreement called as user data for third parties, which will allow the data for diabetes to pull the data from Skatteverket. If you can click on I icon, Kashish, for this data agreement. Here, like I mentioned, the organization admin has defined a data agreement for releasing user data towards third parties. Here, the user data is collected for registration purposes in Data for Diabetes organization. If you scroll a bit down, before that, in the data exchange mode, you can scroll a bit up, Kashish. Here, the Skatteverket organization is the data source here. So the data exchange mode is data source. In the lawful basis of processing, the basis is consent, because the user has to explicitly consent for the data to be released from Skatteverket towards Data for Diabetes app. And in the data policy configuration, third-party data sharing is true because a data is going to be released towards a third-party organization, which is Data for Diabetes. And the attributes which is available for the Data for Diabetes app or organization is name, age, and address as defined here. Now, if we can close this data agreement, Shish. Let's move on to the application now, the reference application. Thank you. So we are opening On the right side, we have the Data for Diabetes application, which is an app built by Data for Diabetes organization, a reference application. Like I mentioned, this application will be integrating, will be having a registration workflow where the users can self-onboard by pulling some data from Skatteverket organization, which is another organization, a Swedish tax agency. Let's go through that registration workflow now. Kashish, if you can click on register now. Here, Kashish as user is going to register to Data for Diabetes organization. Okay, so we can clearly see that the app has integrated the data agreements defined in the Data for Diabetes organization. Kashish, on the left side, if you can go to Data for Diabetes admin dashboard. Yeah, good. So the organization admin has defined a data agreement called as registration data as shown earlier. So now if we click on the data agreement on the right side as an individual, we can see that that data agreement is being clearly communicated to the individual that this is used for registration purposes. And this is the data policy configurations here. And third-party data sharing is false. So that clear communication happens in this manner towards the individuals. You can close this data agreement. As an individual, I'm okay with this data agreement detail, which is conveyed to me by the Data for Diabetes organization. So I'm going to click on next button. So now Kashish as user is taken to Skatteverket organization, which is the data using data source from which the data is going to be released towards the Data for Diabetes. So here Kashish is going to log in as Kashish from Skatteverket organization. So this is that IDP integration that we mentioned earlier. Sign in. Now Kashish is shown a data sharing page where it is conveyed to the user that Data for Diabetes application, which is the application that Kashish is registering to, wants to access the following data from Skatteverket organization, which is the data source, for a purpose. And purpose in this case is user data for third parties. And then it is shown to Kashish that there are 3 attributes which is going to be released about her from Skatteverket, which is name, age, and address. And it is all toggled on. And in the data agreement details, if you can click on data agreement details, Kashish, here we can see the data agreement that is defined in the Skatteverket organization. Kashish, on the left side, if you can go to the Skatteverket organization, which is the data source, we can see that there is a data agreement defined for releasing the data towards Data for Diabetes application. And we can see the policy configurations. Inside that, we can see third-party data sharing is true, which means it is released towards an external organization. So Kashish, if you can close the data agreement as an individual. So Kashish as user is okay with this data agreement. She's going to click on authorize. So now she has agreed to that agreement towards Skatteverket, and she's back to the app, which is Data for Diabetes reference app. So on the left side, if Kashish, you can go to the Data for Diabetes organization. Now we are taken to the next data agreement, which is used by the app to collect the consents from the user, which is donate your data. This data agreement is of course optional. A user doesn't have to mandatorily sign up for this data agreement. Here it is clearly informed to the user that there is an option for you to donate your data towards research initiatives. And these are the fields that is available for donation. And on clicking data agreement details, Kashish, we can see what all details are there in this data agreement. As a user, I'm okay with this data agreement. So Kashish, if you can close this data agreement, agree to it. Of course, you can also skip it. Now she's taken to next data agreement, which is backup and restore. Here it is communicated to the user that there is an agreement for backupping and restore functionality in this application, which enables the users to backup towards a cloud storage system and restore it back whenever required. Again, there is a data agreement detail here. If we can click on that data agreement detail, it is conveying that information towards the user. You can close that data agreement. So Kashish as user is okay with this data agreement too. She's agreeing and click agree and finish button. She can click on that. Now she's taken to the OTP screen. She's received an OTP, clicking on confirm. Now she's taken to the Data for Diabetes home page, which means that she's registered and logged in to the application. So this workflow.
If I may add, so the whole sequence of events that you saw, that can be decided by the application. So in this case, we decided, okay, let's show the user or take the user through all the available processing of data, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the case.
Thank you, Lal. So now the user is part of data for diabetes organization.
Honey,
please go ahead.
Yeah, no, just maybe quick question. I'm just also trying to locate the consent building block within the overall GovStack. So there are two levels of data agreements. There is the data agreement that needs to happen between those two organizations at the IM level, meaning that those organizations agree to share data in principle. But then this data agreement, which needs the consent of the user, which should be on top of that. So just to confirm that,
So whatever. So we have different level. There's a hierarchy of agreements typically. So the agreement between the individual and the organization is called data agreement. The agreement between two organizations is called data disclosure agreement. That is like an out-of-band process, at least as of today. So of course, nothing. And in reality, the data disclosure agreement is say a superset of the data agreement. So it just gives additional information about from an organization to organization perspective. But at the end of the day, if a company, let's say Aadhaar, decided to export data, they will define a data agreement as the first step, where they will specify that, okay, these are the kind of data Aadhaar can actually release it to any third-party applications. And then the third-party application or the Aadhaar formulates a data disclosure agreement based on the data agreement that is defined, evaluating the risks and so on. And they can probably publish into a data marketplace. And almost anyone can go and agree to this data disclosure agreement, adopt that data disclosure agreement to formulate the agreement that is internally going to be used by that application.
Yeah.
So that is a sequence.
But in case there is this, information mediation component, those data closure agreements, in essence, should have been already defined in the IM.
That's right.
So this is another layer, but the data closure agreement seems to me a duplicate, because it's in essence two organizations agree to share data. So for me, it's a duplicate, which could be good because in some cases you might not have an IM. So you need to have this data closure agreement. But what happens if you have those data closure agreement already set up through another building block?
That's perfectly okay. So the reason why I just shared a white paper that we released as part of an IEEE publication. The reason why we came up with this data disclosure agreement is purely to automate the whole process from a data space or a data marketplace perspective. But if there's an existing system that is out there, nothing stops us to reuse that whole functionality.
So you can reuse this other the disclosure agreement that exists already.
Absolutely.
Okay. So another question which is related, when you kind of logged in the first screen, I'm assuming that you are using your ID that is defined at the other application. I don't recall the name, which is Swedish.
When you logged in, you mean log into data for diabetes, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So when Kashish entered her ID, the intermediate identity management block is coming from Skatteverket, the Swedish tax authority.
Yes. Okay. So you are using, you are using the credential that are through OpenID Connect. So you are using the same credential, and therefore you are kind of following any type of authentication that the other system is using to identify yourself. If it's an OTP or whatever, you're gonna use it. But what you need to get the consent of the user, that the user is consenting to share his data or her data from the other system for registration purposes.
That's correct.
Okay.
So Kashish, if you go to the admin dashboard of Skatteverket, so the agreement corresponding to the agreement, if you go to the manage users consent records, so essentially that consent record is getting created Okay, for some reason, yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, the consent record is getting created. If you look at the very top one, is getting created when Kashish say, authorized exchange of information.
Okay.
So that is since Katavargat also. So of course, we don't mandate that everybody has to use consent BB. If they use consent BB, this is how it actually functions. So that is what we formulated in this demo.
So here you have two consent BBs that are talking to each other, right?
That's correct.
So one which is recording this, the other one is recording what? It's recording more or less the same thing, no?
It's recording more or less the same thing, but the thing is, like, at least from a GDPR point of view, it's a requirement for every organization to keep the record of processing according to Article 30. So every organization need to have some kind of a record of what they are actually doing, and they're liable for that, retaining those records.
Okay, so one agency is saying, yes, I shared the data, and the other organization is saying, yes, I get the consent from the user to get access to the data from the other organization.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like money transaction, right? So if I use my credit card to make a payment to a kiosk, the bank, of course, keeps a record of the transaction, and of course, the kiosk also keeps a record of the transaction. That is the receipt that you get. Yeah. So it's a similar approach.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, so the Article 30 registry, anybody that needs to do that actually has to have that in place, because the Data Protection Authority can come and ask for it at any point in time. So this is work that has already been done by most European companies, at least, which have to handle GDPR data.
I mean, most regulations that we have evaluated, including the Indian regulation, has the same kind of legal requirements. So at the end of the day, it's the organization who is liable when it comes to processing any kind of personal data.
Thank you,
George.
So let me continue. So now, Kashish, on the left side, if you can open the data for diabetes admin dashboard. Yeah, thank you. So now, as a user, Kashish is part of Data for Diabetes application. She has registered to the app now. On the top right corner, you can see a gear icon. Here, there is one more integration that is done by the application towards the consent BB. So the Data for Diabetes application developer has integrated privacy dashboard mobile version, mobile SDK of the consent BB to the app, so, which is accessible by clicking My Privacy Dashboard in the settings. On clicking, it is opening this SDK, which is provided by the consent BB. So any app can pretty much integrate this SDK and provide this panel towards their individuals to perform privacy rights.
This integration basically is a single line of code integration. So the panel that you saw, if you recollect, is exactly the look and feel of the data agreement that has been defined in the panel, in the organizational panels, in the data agreement field, basically.
So as an individual, I can now, or Kashish can now see the data agreements that is defined for her in the Data for Diabetes organization. If you recollect from the registration workflow, Kashish had agreed to all those agreements: backup and restore, registration data, donate your data agreements. So now, Kashish, if you can go to one of the agreement details, backup and restore, for example, we can see that this is the data attribute that is used for backup and restore purposes. You can go back, Kashish. On the top right corner, there is 3 dots. We can click on that and then access the consent history for Kashish. You can see that Kashish has agreed to 3 agreements during the registration workflow, allowed for backup and restore, allowed for donate your data and registration data as well. So now going back, Kashish, can you opt out of backup and restore, for example?
Can I just make it? Yeah. So if you look at it, 2 of them, the backup and restore and the donate your data, that the person can toggle on and off. That's because the lawful base of processing for that is consent or legitimate interest.
Kashish,
whereas the registration is, whereas the registration is kind of green disabled. That is because it's contractual in nature. So that means that users cannot opt out of it. They can only opt in during the registration process, for example. Over to you, Kashish.
Okay.
And George.
So now, and one more detail that is conveyed to here is that in the number of attributes that is allowed is shown to the user that allowed 2 of 2, which means that 2 of attributes that is listed in the data agreement is allowed, and then in donatio data 4 of them is allowed. So here from this panel, the user can opt in and opt out at any time during their use of this application. So Kashish, if you can opt in again to backup and restore. Good, thank you. So now on the admin dashboard side, Kashish, can you go to the consent records? We can see that Kashish had opted out earlier, and then now it is opted in for this version of data agreement. Yes, Sati, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I was wondering, in low resource settings, when people may not have sophistication to use these kind of features on an app, is there an assisted mode where somebody else can do it for people? How would individuals be able to provide their consent in such cases?
Yeah, so this is something that has come on every now and then, and the decision at that time when we formulated the specification was that the consent has to be, the whole idea of consent itself is that it has to be provided by the individual, and the application actually is catering to the individual as such. So that has been like the formulation that we have, or the assumption that we have done very early on. So I guess you're talking about a scenario where somebody actually is assisted to perform these consents when somebody is actually physically there and so on, right?
Yeah, sort of, right? Because one is obviously having a smartphone with the application like this, the availability of that. Second is, even if the smartphone is available, the usability of that.
Yeah. So the way I would do it in that case is pretty much like there's a notification that goes to the end user, and the either out of band notification, like for example an email or a SMS, and the person is able to click that link and agree to that whole transaction. So even in the UCSD workflow, we have a situation where the enrollment officer is requesting payment details from the individual, and it goes as a consent to share the data to the individual as a notification.
Thank you. George. I would like to add one more point to that note is that for example, there is a kiosk that can integrate this consent BB API and then collect physical evidence of the users present there, for example, biometric evidence or some other way to recognize that user is present there, and then record the consent on behalf of that user with this evidence. This is being supported in the specification and in the API as well, so but not demonstrable.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yolanda.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been very insightful. And you mentioned at the beginning, I just wanted to clarify my understanding that not all the features were incorporated into the sandbox. Is this understanding correct?
That's correct, yeah. So all the requirements that has been laid out has been incorporated. In fact, we have probably added 40% more requirements than that was originally written.
So then everything that we have seen so far, it is incorporated in the sandbox?
Yes, absolutely.
Ah, okay.
Sorry, when you say sandbox, incorporated in sandbox, you mean integrated?
GovStack sandbox.
Oh, sorry, I'm totally misunderstood you. So that is a plan we have from December 15 onwards. So if you look at our work packages, work package 3 is the outcome of what you're seeing now. And as we speak, we are doing this validation testing with this data for diabetic and the UCSD API integration. From December 15, we are planning to have an instance up and running in the GovStack sandbox.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you look at Yolanda, the way we have architected it, it's a microservice, and as long as the endpoints are integrated and the endpoints are working, it doesn't matter where the service actually is running. So I see very little risk in this approach. So we have formulated a 3-step approach. Step 1 is really replace APIs currently that is used in UCSD with our API. Second, step 2 is replace it with a microservice that is up and running in our demo environment. Step 3 is the sandbox environment. So that's how we have formulated. And that's also to align with the work plan that we have created.
Thank you.
Nico.
Yeah, thanks. So I think there's a few facets to it. It's all these functionalities are not in the first demo of your city, right? And there will be the full functionalities in the sandbox integrated. However, I think the interesting part is how do we showcase this? And my question was towards, is there also a this data for diabetes, is there also a web app or something which is easier to access? Because we have certain, I call them mini scenarios towards certain building blocks. We have this, for example, with issuing an identity for citizens with MOSIP. This is a very focused on one scenario, focused on one building block, and we could also give access to interested people on the sandbox environment to this scenario. But I see that it might be complicated with the app you're showcasing there. Is there a second version or something?
Unfortunately, we don't have a web version of the Data for Diabetic app, but we do have the portal, the web client for Data for Diabetic app. So we may have to mock up a Data for Diabetic web portal if that kind of functionality is needed. But the assumption was that UCSD or the GovStack sandbox environment would have some application at some point that is demonstrating the whole functions.
Yeah, I don't think that we can do. Well, it's another topic, but including it all in the UCT might be difficult. So that's why we're
happy to discuss that. I mean, we have given like time until February 15 to work with you guys when it comes to the sandbox integrations and what makes sense and so on. So we're happy to discuss that during the time. George, we are slightly going over time. I hope it's fine. So we'll take probably another 5 to 10 minutes. That's okay.
Thank you. So just for demonstration, I will also show the privacy dashboard for the Skattavarkat organization that we have deployed towards individuals in the web portal. So Kashish, on the left side, if you can go to the privacy dashboard for Skattavarkat. You can log out for a second. Yeah, okay. So can you log in with your Skattavarkat credentials, Kashish?
Yes.
So on the left side, we are now going to see the web privacy dashboard version for we have deployed for Skattavarkat users. So now Kashish is logging using her Skattavarkat credentials towards the web privacy dashboard. We can see the data agreement that was defined by Skattavarkat for releasing the data towards third parties. And then similar to the privacy dashboard in the mobile, on the top right corner, we can click on the user avatar and then access the consent history. And then see the logs as well for the user. So now jumping back to the admin dashboard to show the last functionality that I would like to demonstrate, which is the Webbook functionality. So in the demo, in the admin dashboard for Data for Diabetes, we have defined a Webbook URL, which is now subscribed to opt-in and opt-out events of users for the data agreements. So Kashish, can you open the Webbook portal, sample Webbook portal, and clear the Webbooks? And then Kashish, can you opt out of backup and restore? So now we can see that a Webbook is triggered to an external system, and this is the payload that is being sent to that external system to trigger any other IT workflows. That is it for my demo. Thank you all.
Back to the slides, please.
Back to the slides, Kashish.
Yeah, so just to recap what we demonstrated was two organizations involved, one being the data source and the other being the data using service during a registration workflow as part of demo 2. Next slide. And demo 3 is where we spoke about the end user application part. You can click, Ashish. And where we also demonstrated the webhooks, view data agreements, and being able to toggle on and off if it is based on consent. Next slide, please. Yeah, as a final note, we have documented most of these things. We have created a playground where developers can try out our application, and all these things are pretty much automatically deployed using a few commands. All our images are also available in Docker Hub and also available as client libraries in CocoaPod, that is the iOS part, and the Jetpack is the Android libraries. We have also created a Helm chart that is published externally that can be used, for example, if you want to deploy to AWS or similar in a Kubernetes environment. From our side, the work package 4 is ongoing. We are on time in completing by mid-December, and then we will start the sandbox integration. Having said that, we've already started aligning with the sandbox team in integrating the APIs. I see very little risk, really. And originally, we had actually anticipated much more time for integration, but I'm beginning to feel that it's going to be easier than what we had planned. Largely because of the sandbox integration use cases is very minimal compared to the functionality that we have today. Having said that, yeah, we have a few things like how do we really amplify or how do we demonstrate the whole functionality, etc., in a good way? That is something that we need to align with Nico and team. Next slide, please. I think that's very much the demonstration from our Consent BB team with our latest deliverables. Yeah, Hannah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's very reassuring to see that what we've been talking about in a few months and it's now becoming a reality. So that's great.